switch over to this one. So let's try to share this link if you are able, because I can't get this to work at all. One moment. All right, let me try to get this. Let's go. I'll get the link and put it over into the other one that's happening. Just hang on a moment. I'm going to copy and paste this for those of you hanging out here. All right. Okay, we've got 10 here. All right, just letting everybody come on over. I am so sorry, everyone. Let me set up my computer like I usually do for these. I'll just give everyone a moment to reconfigure this. And thank you, everyone, for your patience. Hi, Jane. Oh, such a helper. Such a helper. All right, pop out chat. Okay. Thank you all. It means a lot to me that you are all patient and wonderful, etc. I am so annoyed that this wonderful thing that I did, obviously just won't work, but that's all right. Basically, I scheduled it ahead of time because I thought that that would be awesome. And it made it to where I couldn't use it at all whatsoever. So it's still just hanging there and I can't go live on any of the things. But you know what? That is not what's important. What's important is that we are all here together now, hopefully. Got a baby Jane, sweet baby Jane hanging out here. And what is really a bummer is that the link that we made is the thing that is on the International Wildlife Film Festival website, and there's just nothing I can do about that. So hopefully in that chat, people can just see that we need them to head over somewhere else. So yeah, if anyone knows how to do that, that would be great. But okay, yes, Jane said hi. So hopefully there are those of you who are able to come over from IWFF. Hey, there's Carrie. Wonderful. Thank you, Carrie. Carrie is our director, our one of our leads for the International Wildlife Film Festival. It is the 43rd annual, and it usually takes place here in Missoula, Montana, where I am based. And the amazing thing that happened, again, much like life on Earth, adapting and rolling with the punches and going with the flow, is that we as a film festival also adapted and we moved online. And thanks to a bunch of very generous filmmakers and also sponsors, we're able to have almost like the vast majority of our films for the festival this year online for free to stream this week, which is so wonderful. And if you want some extras and some of the films that are requiring a virtual pass, it's a sliding scale. It's kind of give what you can, minimum of $5, and it's for a whole week of just awesome stuff. So how this all got started is, those of you who know me from Nature League, you know that I love doing outreach and education and science communication. And so I was approached by Carrie, who's hanging out in the chat here, and asked me to do education outreach for the festival this year. And so as we moved everything online, I was gathering extra resources, and I mentioned that I would love to do a Nature League live stream, and we would kind of link it up with the festival. So there are some people on here that know me and have known me for a while, and there are some people on here that maybe are coming over from the festival and haven't met me before. So I will just say hello. My name is Brit. This is Sweet Baby Jane. She helps me with all things science. And I am from Florida originally. Got a bachelor's in zoology and a master's in marine biology. Did a lot of focus on genetics, and am now at the University of Montana doing a PhD in wildlife biology and interdisciplinary studies. Being from Florida and doing a master's in marine biology, coral reefs are one of my favorite things. And corals themselves are, in my opinion, just some of the coolest creatures on Earth. Speaking of which, for this Q&A, we should totally start off with just what is a coral, right? Animal, plant, fungus. Who knows? They're just super cool. That answer definitely is correct. But also, what do you guys think in the chat? How do we classify coral, the creature that is coral? Animal, plant, mineral? Not a mineral, it's living. Pieces are a mineral. Animal-ish, I like that. Yeah, so as you guys are kind of figuring it out, yeah, it is a mixture. So yeah, you guys are on top of it. Basically, coral itself, so like a coral, a piece of coral, is going to have 3 different components all going on at the same time, which is totally amazing. It is, as you guys are saying, it is absolutely in the animal kingdom. So it is classified as like kingdom Animalia. It's an animal. And with that, it has a lot of different animal features. Like it has symmetry in its body plan. It has different developmental things that we see within the animal kingdom, but it doesn't look like many other animals. Its closest relatives that we could easily think of, right, are things like sea anemones. And it's actually in the phylum that contains jellyfishes, and that's phylum the Cnidarians. With a C, Cnidarians. I've got my questions here, yes. And I do believe we had several people asking about just what are they. Yeah, so they're in phylum Cnidaria. Yeah, they're basically a form of jellyfish, but not really, right? They're their own thing. Nothing has to be a form of anything else. Modern corals, at least, we started seeing around 250 million years ago. So not as old as my sharks, which are my favorite species on Earth, but they are old. They made it through the extinction with the dinosaurs and been around for quite some time. And so, yeah, it's super cool, right? So some of you know more about this than others, and that's totally fine. We'll start basic and we'll go from there. So the thing that they share in common with sea anemones is having a polyp. So and yes, conservation educator, yeah, sharks are totally older than quarter. Sharks are so old. They're like hundreds of millions of years old, and they're just so awesome. But about corals, so they have this functional unit called a polyp, And that polyp is kind of the animal unit that is coral. So we have that polyp, and that polyp is surrounded by some tentacles, and those tentacles have stinging cells along them. So if you almost imagine kind of like a bulb that then is surrounded by these tentacles, that would be like a polyp. The cool thing about coral, and there are a couple other species like this on Earth, things that are closely related to them, they have these two different life forms. So they have a polyp, the polyp life form, which is their Medusa life form. What a wonderful name to describe this, right? And then they have the life form of like the baby coral, which are these larvae, and those actually swim. So coral have these two very distinct kind of phases in their life where they are either swimming and babies, or they are sessile, so they're non-moving, and they're actually these polyps. Yeah. And yes, you also can have, I think Gary mentioning free swimming Medusa. I think there are some species that are able to have that life form actually move around. In fact, I think that's actually part of the name for some as well. So if anybody knows more about like some of the free swimming Medusa jellyfish, or not jellyfish, sorry, corals, please feel free to mention them here. That's a rarer form. But in general, I love that life on Earth always has exceptions. But in general, that non-moving form, that polyp, we have that Medusa. Medusa in Hebrew is what jellyfish are called. That's so cool. I love it. So yeah, so we have these so we have this polyp, this animal, right? Now, here's where it gets complicated as far as taxonomy. Coral, the animal, is really, really good at making some combo deals. And that's why when you look at a coral reef, and you're just looking at the coral, it's like, how on earth is this just a bunch of polyp? There's like hard stuff there, right? Well, that's because what makes them really unique and actually separates them from their close relatives is that they can actually lay down these harder minerals. Sometimes depends on the species. I think some are calcium carbonate, some are limestone, but imagine just this harder kind of calcium that allows them to then have this substrate and grow. And it's that skeleton that they lay down, that's the thing that actually grows over time. It grows really slowly, but grows over time. And so you have basically inorganic, like skeleton, so non-living. Then you have the animal part, but then you also have a plant part. And I saw you guys mention some in the comments. So there are actually plant cells, like algae cells, that combo up and live within and nearby these polyp systems of coral. They're called zooxanthellae or zooxanthellae. It's a very strange and very cool word, which I saw some of you guys type out. No, this is in fact not vodka. Definitely dihydrogen monoxide, like I like it. Thank you, chat. Good. And so there are actually plants that are symbiotic with them. So sim together, bio life. So they live together, these zooxanthellae cells, these kind of single-celled plants, if you will. And it's those that actually give the coral, a lot of the times, the color that it has. Now, here's what's fun. We find corals all over the ocean in terms of shallow and deep. Did you know that? They're actually shallow corals, and there are also deep water corals. And coral reefs are when we have all these big kind of colonies that then have branched out and kept growing and cloning and reproducing, which we'll hit on in a moment because I see some of you guys asking about how they reproduce. Don't worry, Zachary, bleaching is coming. Nobody worry. We got to hit it because it's important, but we should understand what they are first before we talk about like the threats, though I love that you brought it up. So in general, when they live in these huge, massive colonies that have all these different polyps and have a bunch of different species and builds infrastructure to have coral reefs. Coral reefs we find in shallow seas because they actually are able to get light. Those zooxanthellae and these plant cells are able to do photosynthesis. And that's able to have a feedback back and forth with the coral, kind of each feeding each other symbiotically. And so there are some types of coral in the deep sea that do it completely differently. So they actually are existing without that photosynthetic component. So they totally can live in conditions with uh, low light and also low oxygen. I found something really cool as I was looking at some kind of fun things about this. Um, they have actually found corals, and this, by the way, speaking of kind of why we're here, in collaboration with the International Wildlife Film Festival, there is one of the documentaries called Lost Cities, and it is available and you can watch it, and it's actually an interactive documentary, and in it you'll find some of these exceptions for like the deep water, and also even things like there's, I think they found coral in like the mouth of the Amazon, like really murky, and low oxygen components, which is just totally amazing, right? Sweet baby Jane is letting me know she would like out of the room, so just give me one moment. Baby Jane, you're just gonna meow to be let back in, so I don't even know why I do this. Go ahead, be free. Yeah. Luckily, they've learned to open doors. And by they, I mean baby Jane has. Exactly. Life finds a way. It's true. So in one of these documentaries, the Lost Cities, the interactive documentary, I think I found something about actually how low they can go, or the shallow water. And let's see, I took so many notes. Anyway, we're talking really deep, as far as ones that live in these deep sea areas. The cat is always on the wrong side of the door. You are absolutely right. It is true. Um, so that's just like tiny bit about just what is a coral, as far as is it an animal, is it a plant, is it non-living, like what on earth is it? And the answer is that coral itself is an animal, and it lives in association with plant and also creates and drops its own kind of mineral. So very cool stuff. I'm gonna scroll in the comments right now to check some of these. Hopefully everybody was able to come on over from that other link. And again, I am so sorry that that was difficult. I will be able to make that work on Thursday when I do one of these on pangolins. Um, but we are checking right here. And for the next one, and actually, I think I have one from Tamar, who made our amazing graphics and is super supportive and loves learning all about these the same way that I do. She asked about the percent of the ocean that is actually made up of coral reefs. So this is really quite incredible, because when we think about the importance of the ocean to humans and to other species, it's always like coral reefs, coral reefs. We got to save the coral reefs, oceans, because there's coral reefs. Maybe because coral reefs, right? It's just like such a part of why we think about saving the ocean or protecting ocean habitats is this one type of biome. And that's for a good reason. There are so many different species that live in these massive groups of coral that are in these shallow seas. And so if you actually look at it though, I was kind of digging around for this, and most estimates are about 2%, or even less than 2% of the ocean floor are actual coral reefs. And that's like around 1% or less than 1% of the whole Earth's surface. So like this is such a small region when you think about just surface area for life on Earth, to have coral reefs, which are so important because of how much they provide. I think close to like 25%, so like a quarter of all the commercially important like fish species or things that you might buy and eat that are fish, have spent time in or live primarily on coral reefs, which is really, really cool. Um, so yeah, they're the rainforest of the ocean. That's a great way to think about it, right? Rainforests don't make up that much surface area either, and yet we see so much biodiversity there for sure. Yes, thank you, Carrie. So Carrie's mentioning this other bit about the successful methods in recovering or reestablishing bleached reefs. So there are two of these amazing films that you can check out. The International Wildlife Film Festival. Go check out the virtual festival this whole week. One of them is The Lost Cities, which is that interactive documentary that you can find all kinds of information on. But there's also a documentary called Spawning Hope, which has to do with conservation, and has to do with the way that different coral is actually being bred by scientists and by researchers right now, and being transplanted to increase genetic diversity. So I think in order to kind of understand that and understand a lot of the information that was in Spawning Hope, awesome, Chris. Glad to hear it. Yeah. So, in order to kind of understand those conservation pieces that you'll see in the documentary Spawning Hope, if you check it out, have to do with coral reproduction. And someone even asked on here earlier. I saw just how do corals reproduce? Right. We figured out a little bit of how they're classified, but how do they reproduce? The answer is all of it, all of the ways, every way except like some of the bacterial ways. But corals, like, they reproduce sexually, they reproduce asexually, and from there they are able to reproduce completely on their own. You can have some with male parts, some with female parts, some with both parts, and even within the different kinds of modes of reproduction, they can do so. The fertilization can be internal and external. It's like the most amazing sample platter of the ways to make more of yourself. You can see with corals, which is so cool. So as far as like how they generally reproduce, and I gave myself some notes to share with you guys on this one, because I thought it was important for understanding the Spawning Hope documentary that's available. This is, and I'm trying to, mammal, a plant, a mineral. So remember how we talked about there being the two different kind of body, the two different life stages. You have both the larval, like the baby life stage, and then you also have the medusa, or that polyp, the one that's just sitting, typically hanging on. So what happens is, as far as sexual versus asexual for coral reproduction, sexual reproduction is saying we're having the joining of two separate gametes, so two different individuals. There's actually a combining of genetic material. And one of the benefits of that, of course, is to increase genetic diversity. But one of the things that's great about asexual reproduction, where it's just you and you're making more of yourself, is it's a great way for something like a coral reef to build in mass. So it doesn't necessarily make it more diverse, but it does make it bigger. So that is the kind of thing where you have fragmentation is one kind of method of that asexual reproduction, where there are certain coral that if a piece is broken off and put somewhere else, they're actually fine. They're good to go. And they can then carry on and keep doing their thing. And the couch potato stage, I like that. That's definitely a good one. And then there's also what did I get here? There we go. So that's with fragmentation. You can also have budding, which is where the polyps themselves, I mean, they're cloning themselves, basically. They're just making more of themselves. And I'm reading Tamar, sexual reproduction even in the same individual. Yes. So I mean, yes. So let's say two individual gametes or sex cells. Though the whole purpose is kind of being able to mix that up. So that might be a deeper question, and I will absolutely get back to you because that is a very good question. We'll apparently need to do a reproduction deep dive, certainly, which is the name of a movie that is not streaming right now, but maybe is somewhere. So anyway, with the sexual reproduction, you have the actual fertilization. And so a lot of corals can actually release. So they have egg cells and sperm cells. And there are some corals that will get fertilized externally. And so they will do these mass spawning events where they release these gametes, right? And then they will all kind of mix together, find each other, and then become fertilized. And then pretty quickly, they can then turn into that free swimming larvae, and then that larvae will be like, hey, over here looks good, and then it will change into that other form and kind of set down those roots. But then there are also species that will actually do internal fertilization, so they'll keep the egg cell kind of like within the polyp, and then it'll release the sperm cell out, and so those sperm cells will go over and then drop down into an egg that is maybe farther away. Like that's one way that genetic diversity can go up. And Zachary's mentioning full moon spawning session. Yes. So when we talk about these big spawning events, this is when the corals are releasing these gametes, these sex cells, these egg and sperm cells, and they do it all at a very similar time. They're kind of synchronized because that way they can actually line up, right? It would be like if you were trying to find a date and you went to a hangout place when no one else was there. So basically, like right now, while social distancing, no social distancing as far as, reproduction is concerned, at least as far as coral spawning, right? Fair enough. Oh, good. Our friend Adrian has joined us. For those of you who do not know Adrian or me, and you're joining from the festival, Adrian and I like to make a lot of videos together called A to B, where we chat about all kinds of topics. Yes, we are talking coral reefs. You're right. And we're talking coral reef reproduction, which is even better. So because of wanting to synchronize, what do you think would be a really good way when you don't have text messaging or a Twitter feed to be like, hey guys, let's do this thing at 11:30 on Thursday? The moon. Yes, Zachary, there is an episode we did. And actually, Adrian, yes, Adrian is reacting right now because we made an episode where Adrian was asking me about the full moon and about whether there's actually any science behind the full moon affecting behavior. And one of the things I mentioned was coral and how they actually use the light of the full moon to synchronize these spawning events, which is super cool. Thank you everyone for correcting Adrian's spelling. I have no doubt he appreciates it immensely. I know, what a beautiful community of people, indeed. So that with some species happens quite often, so like triggered by, let's say, like lunar cycle, but for some species it might just be like a once a year event, like a huge spawning event. And so with this documentary that's available through IWFF this week, Spawning Hope, is about taking advantage of the ways that corals can reproduce and how corals are already kind of made to shoot up and out sperm cells to meet up with individuals with different genetic material. So it kind of takes it the next step, right? If corals already have mechanisms to be able to mix and match genetic material, then why not have it done manually by humans? And so this all has to do with the current threats to corals, one of which is the resilience and ability to change to a changing world. Corals, just like us and just like everything else on Earth, are exposed to some major changes. Our world is changing. And so what that means is that much like anything else, their corals have to adapt. They have to move, adapt, or die, like all other life on Earth. The things they're really adapting to are temperature and acidity. Though interestingly, it's looking more and more like oxygenation is playing a huge role as well in terms of these stressors. So just like any other species and population, there's going to be variation. There's going to be differences. The ones over here might be a tiny bit different from the ones over here. And those differences, some might be better suited for a warmer climate or for a more acidic ocean. And so what that means is that you could have individuals that just are better suited for the way that the world is changing right now. There are scientists that have actually found genes specific to like temperature resistance within certain coral species. And so we are now getting close enough to where we actually can figure out and pinpoint individuals, so like individual corals that maybe have these genes or these adaptive regions, and then they can be paired with others, like to use that genetic diversity, but specifically kind of propagation of these resilient genes in the population as a whole. So not really gene splicing, Adrian, though I can see your gears kind of turning as far as like the next hit movie action idea, right? So the Spawning Hope documentary is all about it's elkhorn coral specifically, and elkhorn coral has two major kind of genetic populations. One like closer to Florida, like I think it's the western one, and then one lower down, all in the Caribbean. That's the eastern one. And so what they're doing is they are actually cryopreserving, so on ice, coral sperm on ice. It's the worst live show you'll ever see in an arena, but some really good science. So there are coral sperm cells that have been frozen and kept that are now being given to and fertilizing, like basically what in vitro. I mean, the way that we do for people, the way that we do for I guess cattle, for other domesticated species. They're doing this now with the hope of creating kind of a future generation and generations that have these genes that might be more resilient, or in the case of the Spawning Hope documentary, just generally increasing the genetic diversity, because there's two different things. There's increasing genetic diversity generally, so we'd call that assisted, gene transport, gene flow between populations. Or on the other hand, there is the very specific introduced gene and reproductive strategies for the individuals with these genes for tolerance, which is really wild. And so you can see all about this like 15-year study, and they still aren't on their way yet. But if you check out Spawning Hope through IWFF, this short documentary, you'll see the different steps that they had to take to actually be able to do this in the Caribbean, which is really pretty incredible. Though the interesting thing to me, whenever we start talking about genetic rescue or using genes and artificially kind of picking and choosing individuals and traits for the future. On the one hand, this is a really cool example of maybe a good Anthropocene. So this time on Earth where humans are really the driving force, but potentially this is a version of humans maybe righting some wrongs, maybe saying, okay, look, a lot of the issues that coral reefs are facing are because of human actions. So what if we spend our money and time and effort and scientific pursuits to help out? Okay, absolutely. That is one way to look at this. But here on Nature League, if you're new to the channel or new to me, I really like thinking critically and finding every possible angle to consider life on Earth and to consider these topics. So one thing I ask myself, and there's no right or wrong answer, but I wonder with certain projects like this, um, how much do we really know to be able to pick the best gene or the best adaptive thing or the best moms and dads for these corals for the next like super coral generation that'll be better able to fight climate change, and live through warmer seas and higher acidity conditions. Do we really know exactly what corals need, or are we interfering potentially in a process of natural selection where the ones that are not dying are going to be reproducing more anyway? Or, would we just lose too much? For all we know, the earth could change again. We could potentially be setting up these coral reefs to have these certain genes that make them like totally able to take on the next, I don't know, 100, 200 years, even 1,000 years. But what happens after that? What happens when the earth changes again? And then you have this group that maybe are not well suited because they are simply suited in the way that humans saw them being able to survive. Um, you know, it's just kind of interesting. I'm kind of reading comments right now. Um, and Zachary says, answer that question with another question doesn't matter greatly because if it isn't beneficial, would they not just be selected against? Yeah, so that's kind of what I'm saying is like, this what people are doing in these scientific endeavors right now are what we would call artificial selection. The same thing that led us to having a Chihuahua, right? Except in this case, a Chihuahua is not well adapted for anything in its regular environment, though it's very well adapted for fitting in a purse. So there you go. I guess in the example of coral, it's artificial selection, so humans kind of picking and choosing traits, but based on the environment and kind of like speeding up the process of natural selection, which maybe is a little bit different than simply doing artificial selection because we think that looks cute or something like that. But yeah, exactly, Adrian. Like it, maybe it's just doing the thing that would be selected for anyway, but doing it more quickly. And again, like there's not a right or wrong answer. I'm just giving you guys some things to think about in terms of something like this project that you'll see in this documentary, Spawning Hope, and that's happening in general. And this made me want to dig into some recent news about coral reefs, and I found some really fascinating things. And if there's anyone in the chat from Australia, you maybe know what I'm talking about, which is recently there's some very interesting things going on with the country of Australia in terms of protecting the Great Barrier Reef. So the Great Barrier Reef is a coral reef, right? Corals, animals that hang out with plant cells that also make minerals and well kinds of cool stuff. And of course, coral reefs are so productive and home to so many things because they're basically the 3D infrastructure. They are the skyscrapers, the cities. They're allowing other things to live all in this one tiny space. Though not so tiny in the case of the Great Barrier Reef. Great Barrier Reef can be seen from space. From space! It's true. I don't have an echo effect on my voice, but it's true. In space, 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 space. Imagine that it happened, right? So this is a massive place, and we're talking like spanning the distance from, if you're familiar with U.S. geography, one of these films mentioned we're between Los Angeles and Chicago. Like this is the distance that the Great Barrier Reef is for Australia. It is one of the crown jewels of of that country, and so much of the identity of those people, and of course the reef itself, comes from this Great Barrier Reef. And they recently just went underwent the third mass bleaching event in 5 years, which is way more common and way more frequent than usually occurs. And it's because we just have had these massive heat waves going on. So this is the third in 5 years. So Australia is pumping in a lot of money to figure out how best to deal with the problem of potentially losing reefs. And before we hit that, hit the topic of what they're planning on doing, we should probably now briefly mention the process that is coral bleaching, or like what does that mean, right? Conservation educator, you're right. Your house can in fact be seen from space, i.e., Google Maps. That is totally fair. I think it means like naked eye. Yeah. I think what you've said there is what that phrase means. But you're right. I should be more specific, and I appreciate you for pointing that out. So these mass bleaching events, which you can find more on with all kinds of different resources, some of these films that we're mentioning through the festival, and also just if you look up news and related reports. Yeah, exactly, Zachary. Yeah, basically it makes these plant roommates just really not having it anymore, and they move out. So the bleaching, that white that you see, is we're pretty much just seeing kind of naked coral. We're seeing the polyps and that hard skeleton, but the zooxanthellae, or those algal cells, those plant cells, have left because of stressed conditions. So whether that means higher temperature or more acidity or lower oxygen, all these kinds of things can lead to these cells being stressed and leaving the coral. When they do that, the coral is not immediately dead. It's really good to note that. So when you see a mass bleaching event, that isn't just dead coral, but it is coral that potentially will be dead if something does not change. The polyps themselves, the coral animal, has not necessarily died yet, just because the algae is left. But imagine that's part of their food source, and that's part of their setup. So over time, and for some species more quickly than others, it will lead to massive die-offs. But I think it's really important to know that just because you have a bleaching event, that does not mean the coral has all just died immediately. But it does mean the coral is in danger of dying soon if there's not a change. So this event is happening, and we've had it for the third time massively in the last 5 years. And so the Australian government has released a list of 43 ideas. So they sat down and ruled things out and said, you're crazy, no way, and hey, that could work, let's put that in the maybe pile. I don't know, I wasn't there, who can say. But they had all these ideas, and they got down to 43 and released these. And this was recent, I think, maybe this week, I'm not even sure. And so of course I had to click on it and check out what's going on. This is part of the Reef Restoration and Adaptation Program, and we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars going in, and we are kind of having to think outside the box now. And one of those thinking outside the box things happened, I think, just a couple days ago, which was using turbines to brighten the clouds around the Great Barrier Reef. First ever, it was a trial run, and apparently it was actually decently successful, but we're still pretty far off from actually using this. So I'm gonna post, I'll post into the chat just a quick link here, and there's a bunch of things written on it. So this one article is not the article, but it's a way for you to just check it out briefly. So if you see, basically, they're trying to think. This is called geoengineering. So it's changing pieces of the actual Earth. Geoengineering is a larger topic within the Anthropocene. Geoengineering has been suggested for a lot of climate solutions, and can include some really drastic and really intense kind of technology and you know, oh gosh, intervention. There we go. I was like, prefixes in. Yes, Adrian, fair point. Ice cubes, let's call it. Except you're going to mess with the salinity if you do that. So I'm going to need you back to the drawing board. Figure it out. Figure it out. So this is a cloud seeding technology. Basically, it's putting tiny particles into the atmosphere, which then allows the clouds that form to be more bright and more reflective. And when you have more reflectance, there's more ability to have some of that heat energy off of the water and going elsewhere. Greenland ice sheet is on it, right? Unfortunately. Right. So, and I think in this case, it was these really, really tiny sea salt crystals, because again, it will make those clouds brighter. And so they found out that like it definitely became brighter. And I think they found, let's see if they found, there's more on it. You should definitely check out the video that's attached in here. But they, trying to find the results, they took to spraying vessel. I guess they just showed that they could successfully do it. And then they are, over the next 4 years, like looking at impacts and actually using it. So this is not like the project was implemented and it went. This was kind of a pilot, let's briefly try this sort of a thing. Now that's just one of these 43 ideas. Cooling and shading is one. And that's the marine cloud brightening. So I am going to post this to you guys. This is coming straight from the Australian, that official website. So as you can kind of see, there is a pump, filter, and nozzle that's actually spraying these water droplets that have those salt crystals in there. Which again, the whole point is to be able to have that reflectance of the heat energy off and away from the clouds instead of going into the water, because the oceans capture over 90% of that thermal energy that comes in and hits the earth. I mean, that is such a huge reservoir for this. So if you can get some of that to not go all the way to the ocean surface, you're going to have less actually affecting the temperature of the ocean. So marine cloud brightening is one of those cooling and shading options. And one of the other ones, reef structures and stabilizations. So this is like stabilizing loose corals and making even artificial kind of substrate for these. Also coral reproduction and recruitment. Yep. So this is stuff that we've talked about and that you can see in the Spawning Hope documentary. Biocontrol. So that's managing coral predators and competitors. Ooh. Field treatments, probiotics, feeding, medicines, other treatments, enhanced corals from stocks, seeding enhanced corals bred from engineered stock. So let me send you this link to just plain old interventions here. That's just interventions in general, these 43 and the kind of categories that they're in. You know, it is a problem. The reefs are facing some major issues to the point that major drastic interventions are being considered, because especially for Australia, but of course for the entire world, it's just maybe where you live, you're not very close to a coral reef. But certainly for the oceans and for people and for the species that depend on oceans, it for some would argue, you know, that's worth it, something that drastic. And that's kind of similar for any of the climate change solutions on the table. And I think some people are maybe mentioning this. Brightening clouds stopping what's creating the warming. Let me see. Are we brightening? So this is an awesome question and an awesome topic. I had the total privilege of getting to take a philosophy of the Anthropocene course here at the University of Montana with a guy named Christopher Preston. He's an expert on the Anthropocene and the ethical and philosophical implications and technological implications of the time we are living in. And we spent weeks on just geoengineering in this course. And one of the things that is mentioned within the ethics section of this topically is, okay, so maybe we have technology that is just going to get us to not actually have to change any of our own behavior. Like, okay, we're not actually going to stop warming. People are just going to keep doing the people thing. So maybe we can just have these interventions that make it to where we are, netting that out and putting that neutral. And there's absolutely an argument there that that is not the best way to think about it, that we can just do business as usual because we came up with a tech band-aid. When we do something like a tech band-aid, and you can probably think of many medical examples, the way that we just treat something instead of cure it. So the idea that we come up with blood pressure medication instead of changing your diet, something like this, right? Our species is full of examples of this. But with climate, it definitely could mean that it just makes people not really feel responsible, because there can be billionaires and governments and technology that just kind of, makes it fine even though we continue on. So that is its own philosophical consideration. And so you're absolutely on to a really, really good kind of topic there for sure, which is really important. So I think one of the other questions that was asked, oh my gosh, yes, that Futurama, yes, absolutely yes. One of the other questions was just generally kind of, are corals endangered, right? Like we talked about coral reefs, which are when you have a bunch of different coral colonies, these polyps that clone themselves, or that have, spawned and made more. Corals can make more of themselves in all of the ways. There are quite a few corals that are actually listed on the IUCN Red List. The IUCN Red List kind of keeps tabs on for quite a few species now. I think they're over 100,000 now. It might be like 115,000 species of life on Earth that gets listed and is given kind of a threat category. So endangered versus threatened versus least concern. And so I did a quick search for kingdom Animalia, because they're animals. Phylum Cnidaria with the C, Cnidaria, because remember they're in there with the jellies. And then class Anthozoa, just to kind of give, that's a big chunk of corals as we think of them. And I found 884 species listed for the Red List. And even if I just kind of go through and at random read some of the kind of endangered threat listings, I see vulnerable, least concerned, critically endangered, least concerned, vulnerable, data deficient, endangered, near threatened. So it looks like a mixture, a definite mixture. I can in here actually, I can go ahead and filter for red list category. I see there are 7 critically endangered corals. Corals broadly, I didn't include the entire group, but a big chunk of them. 28 listed as endangered, 204 listed as vulnerable. So yeah, of these critically endangered, I'll pull one up and share it with you guys so you can just kind of see what this looks like. So here is a critically endangered coral, Acropora cervicornis. Oh, you know what? I bet that sounds almost like elkhorn coral, just because of the the kind of name of it. Let me grab another one as well. We got Acropora palmata. Here we go. I'll send you guys this one. So you can just see a little bit about what this would look like. There we go. Okay, Chris says, so we have warm water, shallow coral, which are being affected right now. How do cold, deep water or higher latitudes coral hold up to the recent changes? Well, keep in mind that even deeper waters or different latitudes are still being affected. For deeper corals, I think the larger issue is going to be stuff like nutrient mixing and maybe, I don't know, oxygen. But even then, they've become pretty adapted to those different conditions. So that's an awesome question. I wonder if we can see, because remember all that, like the acidity and things like that, the ocean mixes, not quickly, but it mixes. So those changes in acidity can definitely reach down. So let me see, threats to deep sea corals. All right, you guys, I have to howl out the door really quickly because in Missoula at 8 p.m. we howl for essential workers. In a moment. Oh! Okay. Mm-hmm. I heard it. I heard it start up. I had to get on it. Yes, we live in a wonderful place. Yes, howl, indeed. Hank was absolutely not joking about that. We've been howling at 8 p.m. for like a couple weeks now. Deep sea mining. Oh, somebody mentioned deep sea mining. Ancient deep sea corals need protection from modern threats. This is a blog post, looks like National Geographic from 2 years ago. And to answer your question about those, so I guess mining could be an actual issue. Here, I will post this to you in the chat. Yeah, pots and pans, that's not at all as fun as howling. Yay, essential workers. Yay to anyone in the chat who is certainly, I mean, honestly, at a certain point, everyone who is taking care of themselves and each other is essential. But thank you to those on the front lines, certainly, and doing what they can for their fellow neighbors. Yeah, mining. Yeah, I wasn't really thinking about that. But this is a cool article, a blog post about that. Cool. So other questions, and again, really sorry about the issue at the link. I'll get that all sorted out for Thursday. But I hope you're able to jump over. Interesting. I'm just checking some other like things that I found really cool that I saw within the interactive documentary, the Lost Cities documentary. The aging them by counting growth rings, kind of like trees. And oh, how many species are there? There's like thousands. There's so many. And probably a lot that we don't know, especially now that we're finding some like in the mouth of the Amazon. What even is that? We're finding them in places we didn't really know they lived, and so I think we'll keep finding more and more. I actually was thinking, Laura is asking about impact of collection for your aquarium hobby. Well, the interesting thing is like you can start aquarium hobbies with because corals are able to reproduce with cloning and like with fragmentation. I feel like the impact of something like aquariums, especially if they just have one, you could have like one colony and one individual that is every single aquarium coral. I wonder if someone's done that. Oh, I'm curious now. I wonder if it's just all a clone of the same individual. They're like, you are aquariums now. Thank you for your service. You are now every aquarium. And they just like split it up and send it around. I'm not sure, Laura. It's an awesome question. And how do they live on one on top of the other like that? Well, keep in mind that the polyps are really small. I mean, tiny. So and they also are invertebrates, so they don't have backbone, so they're not really being like crushed. And as they imagine kind of with rainforest, like as you have so many trees, it's like, how are they not crushing each other? Well, they all kind of like figure it out as they're all reaching for that kind of space of sunlight and being able to access that resource. Um, Here is something really cool about corals, and the way that we might start really looking at them in terms of human health is the idea of immortality. Yes, the immortal coral. So, you have a coral, right? Let's say that right now it's in the life form that is just hanging out. It is sessile, so it's non moving. Then it releases, let's say, actually, no, let's not say releasing egg or sperm. Let's just say it does budding. So it reproduces, goes into different form, or actually, always love the immortality talk. Yes. Goes and transforms into the larval form. Um, that larval form, it's not like a new baby in certain species. It's actually just changing back and forth between that medusa and then the larvae form. So you have some corals that are like thousands of years old, the same individual. Again, it's not every single species, but these certain species, it's looking like, yes, they can be killed, but if nothing kills them, they will just keep living, which is like totally wild. Um, oh, Chris, mentioning a really good point. So as far as the fishing gear, let's see, deepwater trawling. Right, right. Yeah. So because so there's a couple of things here. Joe is following up about threats to deep sea coral. Yes, definitely more slow growing. So in terms of damage, if you knock out a ton, it takes even longer to be able to repair. Um, and Chris is mentioning talking about banning of damaging fishing gear, right? Oh yeah, nice, awesome. Yeah, I'm like kind of in the middle of something right now, so I didn't just like stop and read the Nat Geo article. Thanks for having my back, Chris. Combo deal. Thank you. um, so yeah, these certain, and you know what's interesting? Like if you think about other species that you may have heard of as being immortal, anybody want to tell me another species you've heard of that is immortal? Let's see it. I know there's a tiny bit of a chat delay. Yes, cats in my heart, correct. Um, Also jelly, hydra, cats love. Yeah, so Medusa, which we learn is Hebrew for jellyfish, right? Tamar, so cool. 9 lives, but dude, that's like infinitely less than infinite. There's an equation there. I'll work it out. I'll work it out later. Yeah, the species you guys are listing are, now you know, super closely related to corals. So it all kind of makes sense. Yes, that math, yeah, the math totally checked out there. I agree. Um, yeah, because you have again that combination of the polyp form, going back and forth between those life cycles. Like the immortal jellyfish goes back and forth between its two body forms, its two life stages. Claudia, vampire is totally allowed. I like it. I like it. Well, thank you for joining. Yeah, thank you guys. Thank you guys for being here. It is 8:12 now. For the sake of me not just coral jellyfish rambling, I will probably call it soon. 4 a.m. high five. Yeah, you guys rock. Those of you that are always around, always watching Nature League content. Thank you for, again, joining me on live streams regardless of the time zone. And hopefully those of you who were able to join, you came over here from the IWFF, the International Wildlife Film Festival. Thank you for joining me. Again, my name is Brit Garner. I am a PhD student here at the University of Montana. I do science communication, and right now I'm getting to do education outreach coordination for the 43rd annual, isn't that amazing, International Wildlife Film Festival, which myself and an incredible team of people, some of which are in the chat here. I think I saw Ryan and I saw Carrie, an incredible group of people at the Roxy Theater here, support independent theaters and businesses in your town. We moved it virtual, and so we are doing our best to have a virtual film festival, celebrate life on Earth, learn about it. As our species deals with something hard for us, we can look at other species to really give us hope and think about the incredible adaptations we see for life on Earth. So thank you guys so much for joining. There is so much to learn about coral and coral reefs. You can check out those 2 documentaries that are part of IWFF that are Lost Cities and also Spawning Hope. And you know what? I bet we can just throw the links there. If anybody is able to do that, I will leave the chat going for a few minutes and someone can throw those links up. But hey, you should check out all the films because they're super awesome, and what a great way to spend some time as you are quarantined and trying to stay safe. Thank you again, and we're totally gonna do it again on Thursday, all about pangolins. We're gonna deep dive into that species, that group of animals. There are several species of pangolins, and how that relates to COVID-19 and also some larger international conservation concerns. Great idea tomorrow. I will add them to the description for later. I will update the thumbnail, the beautiful stuff that Tamar made. And thank you guys for your patience as I got the text sorted out. Have a wonderful rest of your night or morning. And thank you so much for joining me. Keep learning, keep asking questions, and keep being inspired by all the things alive on this lovely planet we all share.